My name is Nicolai Steinø. I'm only an architect, and I hold a PhD in urban design. And I'm also an associate professor at the Aalborg University, Denmark, where I do research into parametric urban design, which I also teach. And most recently, I started to do small-scale consulting in the field of parametric urban design. So, and this is what I'll try to give a very brief account of. So, just for starters, I actually started wondering about a parametric approach to urban design long before I even had a software platform. And I recently found this little animation on my hard drive, which is really going back many years. And I found it quite interesting. As you may recognize, this is SketchUp. I was giving a paper in the mid-2000s at the ECAD conference, which was attended by a certain Bob Aish of Bentley Systems, as it was at the time, who gave me a hard time. How did I even dare to talk about parametric urban design without having a software? Well, only a few years later, this magic software came about. I mean, this is the time when CityEngine was still someone's PhD project, and I'm very happy that this very someone is here today. And it was a complete revelation for me to get my hands on CityEngine. And I figured without any prior knowledge of computation or anything beyond just picking tools off of a palette, I sat down and read the manual. And really, I mean, apart from understanding scope orientation after component splits, CGA is not very complicated. So after a while, I started working. And as you remember, as an architect, I'm mainly occupied with form and form transformations and how you can actually describe form by ways of code and to also try to analyze. And I find coding a very instructive means for analyzing architecture, which I'll come back to. I also teach parametric urban design based on CityEngine, and these are some examples of my students' work. They have great fun also trying to make these kind of variations, and I always ask them to do little GIFs once they complete the course. But in my research, what I came up with now with this fantastic tool was the idea that maybe you can simply identify the rules that govern, if not all, then maybe 90% of all conceivable site layouts, building forms, and facades. And then what you would have, essentially, would be something like the architectural genome. So if we could map that, that would be really cool, because then from single scripts, we could basically just generate anything, very much in the spirit of the previous presentation. So I started to look at a very large number of facades, and as an architect, of course, I'd been taking photos over the years, trying to analyze them, to deduct the underlying structure of these facades, and to build schemas. Trying first to understand symmetries, like rotations, reflections, glide reflections, and shifts, and so on. And also to understand variations. And it turns out that most facades can be described from a single framework by combining symmetries and variations. So I started to test this. And this, of course, became a bit of an obsession for me, trying to understand. If you can understand this on the facade level, then maybe you can do the same on the building envelope and the site layout levels. And this actually was all generated from one of the same script as a test case. So I think it's safe to say that maybe we don't reach the 90%, but we still reach quite a lot. So the next level, what I was interested in is, well, we have all these building envelopes which ultimately hold those facades and all the vertical faces. And if we could describe a way to say, well, on the site layout level, we can think of different layouts. This is a very simplified illustrator-based, by the way, demonstration, and I'm sorry the captions are in Danish. But basically, just for showing that you can make variations of building envelopes, and then all these kind of setbacks and variations to the overall morphology of the building envelope. And then at the next level, you can sort of basically map these different facades, which you see here, to sort of illustrate this whole hierarchical approach to generating urban form. So the next thing we did, we live in a country with very rich open data, GIS data, and we managed to develop a script for importing DTMs and use the height difference between the surface DTM and the terrain DTM, which essentially is building heights, and to subtract the two DTMs and use this value for extruding building polygons. So in a workflow of some 20 minutes, we managed to be able to actually generate 3D models of any Danish urban environment, that is. I know you can do a lot of similar stuff now with ArcGIS Online, but this was developed prior to this facility being part of CityEngine. So we pride ourselves quite a lot of this approach. What we also tried to understand is how to model the relationships between different values in site design. Obviously, a very important relationship is the relationship between required parking and floor area ratios, which of course is a simple relationship, but trying to also implement that into a site layout script, which could sort of devise at least some initial typical parking distributions, and to adjust them according to the floor area ratio. So whenever you build more space, you need more parking, and of course to be able to set the ratios according to whatever zoning area you would be in. In parallel, we also tried to do some similar work on stormwater management. Like, this is a big topic in Denmark these days, that whenever you do a site design, you need to actually figure out where all the excess water from heavy rains will go, whether you do retention ponds or detention ponds, or how you actually deal with this. And this is also, of course, pure math. There are some established relationships between typical return periods, like you get extreme rainfalls of varying degrees over different typical periods, 2, 5, 10, 20 years, etc. And then you can sort of script this relationship to devise the size of this pool as shown in the middle of the image. So the last thing we've been working on is this thing which is in a way similar to level of detail, but it's more an architectural thing, because we want to have different modes of representation. As architects and urban designers, we always present these different maps or diagrams, and we wanted to be able to do it from the script, so that we could keep on modeling up until a very late point in time, so that we wouldn't have to produce all these different images. So this, of course, is a typical master plan layout graphic. And here we have, from the same script, a figure ground and a land use map. And playing with these different modes of representation, we found very useful in order to be able to basically design up to the last minute or so, because very much time and effort is spent in architecture and urban design consulting, revising plans, as those of you in this business will know. And so if we could take the power of procedural modeling to even to a sort of like the front end of final drawings, that could be very neat. So this basically was all on my research side. try to work with clever students, those who grasp what I teach in my Parametric urban design course. But then lately, I also started to do some consulting. I have a very small consultancy called City People. Actually, with its current staffing, it should be called City Person, but don't tell anyone, as we currently don't have any projects running. So one very early project was a competition entry for a big urban extension master plan for a mid-sized town in Denmark. It was like a greenfield development, but there were some different factors. There should be a huge hospital planned into the area. There should be some, let's see if I can just, no, I can't do that. Anyway, you see some brownish parts to the right, which is more densely developed because it's close to the the regional train station, and then more lush green or detached housing areas towards the west and the south. And this, of course, was all generated using basically constraint maps and control maps. As we taught ourselves how to generate large urban areas from open data, we also made this small visualization for our own local municipality in Aalborg. They are doing studies for locations for high-rise buildings. As in Denmark, as anywhere else in the world, we have this high-rise craze going on. And of course, it's a major concern of municipal planning offices. Where should these bastards go and how tall should they be? And then basically, we tried to implement some of those approaches that we had been developing over the years to sort of do these kind of little visualizations. Very simple stuff, all straight out of CityEngine, no overdubs for this one. So, and it's, of course, once all this stuff is in place, it's not a big deal, actually. We did another with some student interns, competition entry, which actually earned us a second prize. For an inner city urban redevelopment scheme in a mid-sized town in Denmark also, meaning that suddenly there was some more money to work with, which was nice, of course. Basically combining CityEngine stuff and then with some small overdubs in this case in Illustrator. But that's always the challenge. I mean, I hate to go outside of CityEngine because everything freezes up. You know, suddenly you cannot shift stuff around or change or modify. And so that kind of makes me nervous. Meanwhile, another example here, a small densification study made for a local housing corporation. How could we fill in this space, which is in the center of the image, with some additional housing to raise the how do you say, the floor area ratio, and then make more out of this very nice location. You see the water line to the upper left. In this case, using also this kind of parking stuff that we've been developing. This was one of these crazy things you sometimes do, as we had no commissions running and no local competitions. My assistant found out that there was this crazy competition for a new urban area somewhere in China, where within the next 2 years they should build a city of so many million people. Anyway, we did use it as a test case to also try to develop some of these different technologies. And then we worked with some students in our sister teaching program, Media Technology, who were very keen on doing sort of 3D visualizations and animations and stuff. This was made using Unity. And I think they actually did a pretty good job running in parallel with our design work. So they set everything up, and then they got the revised model at the end, and they rendered this little video, which sort of accompanied the competition entry with little cars running up and down the streets and so on. So they were quite happy and we were quite happy, so that was good. And then finally, what I want to focus on in a little more detail is a more recent project. Of course, I babble about what I do left and right, and half a year back, someone from a major urban planning consultancy in Denmark called me and said, hey, this parametric urban design that you're constantly babbling about, is it any good? I said, well, yes, of course. That's what I'm trying to say. So, and well, why don't we put it to test then? Because we just want this commission to do a master plan for a suburban expansion, again, mid-sized, or actually this is a small municipal town in Denmark, not far from Aalborg. And they just basically wanted to do this urban expansion towards the south with part of which in the center of the image. And we started working with this consultancy to first do some studies for, I mean, the way these areas develop, as was also described this morning by the American contribution. It's basically a matter of subdividing, and so the developers, they purchase like a large lot of like so-called large lot. It has just one access to a public road, and then they sort of subdivide it and provide all the internal infrastructure and stuff. And so we tried to do some studies as to see how could we do a kind of generic, very similar to what was presented this morning, design so that it couldn't go entirely wrong or totally wrong, but only half wrong whenever these guys come about. And so we also tried to use, of course, these different visualization modes as to test how could we, in the end, represent these different subdivisions that we were working on. But of course, I mean, also in parallel with this, we did a lot of hand sketches because it's still, if you can draw, of course, so much faster than doing only scripting-based graphics. So one important aspect of this contract, and one of the major reasons why we were asked, was that from the outset it was, and that's something which is very strong in Denmark, there was a kind of user participation workshop planned for all the local landowners in the area. Of course, the municipality knew that they had to win over the local landowners for the master plan so that it wouldn't run sour in the implementation phase. And so we took actually the CityEngine model in its then current state directly to the workshop, as you see on the screen in the back. And then my assistant could, of course, do different variations on request from the planners, local planners, and the participants in the workshop, which was really a very interesting experience and a kind of proof of concept that you can do it. Of course, the problem is always, what do you want to actually modify live? And you need to do, of course, some preparatory work. So, and of course, we have this problem of the hard-coded street networks. Please, Esri, can we have modifiable streets so that we can control with scripts? That would be very interesting. Anyway, so this was a great experience for us, and we learned a lot from it. As an example, it turned out that there should be this kind of like a green space, a public green space running through the area, east to west. And of course, the trade-off is always between the number of parcels that you can end up selling at the end. This is of interest to the landowners because it's a matter of how much they can earn from their land. And then, of course, the amount of green space and public space. And so we could do different variations of the green space in terms of its extent and design. And of course, the architects and planners are always very keen to have it look nice. So that was one of the things we could use it for. In the end, the plan turned out to be very different from what we originally set out modeling. I mean, the original plan was very neat and rectilinear, something which is wonderful thing in CityEngine. And obviously this is much more irregular. There's of course an overall street network of these 4 loops entering from different sides and the green space in the center. And then we also needed to have like to demonstrate that these large lots could be developed not only with detached housing, which although typically is what will be almost entirely there, but also with sort of semi-detached or like clustered buildings and stuff like that. So that was some of the things that we could use CityEngine to sort of simulate. Yeah, as you may realize, these renderings were taken out of CityEngine and into Unreal using the new plugin. We had an intern who worked for some weeks trying to understand this pipeline and to do the imports, and I think she did a really great job. And so basically we could use it for of course doing the perspective view renderings. As you see here, these are mainly aerial views, as we didn't go into detailing, architectural detailing. So all our fancy facades, the architectural genome kind of stuff wasn't actually put to use in this project, as they all stand out white. But we could also use, of course, the Unreal renderings for some further rendering in Photoshop, but we didn't really have to do a whole lot. Of course, this may not be top-notch artwork, but it still meets the expectations of the municipality, of what they, and also, of course, of the primary contractor, this engineering consultancy. And finally, we could also use it for demonstrating these different variations on different of these different large lots, how they could be developed either with clusters of buildings or sort of terraced housing and detached housing. And then we thought, well, now we took the effort of taking the model out of CityEngine into Unreal. So why not try to also do some little animations? This wasn't part of the contract, but as the intern was there, she was very keen on doing it. And I mean, of course, the urban planning firm and the client, the municipality, was quite happy to have this kind of add-on. So we just had her do this little Unreal video. She did paint some more grass and stuff onto the grounds. So we learned a lot from it, and the clients were happy to have this extra little feature for their website. So this was basically what I was planning to tell you. I just want to finish off by hinting some of the stuff that's in the pipeline. Back to my research. I'm now with a colleague who's specializing in sustainable architecture, trying to convince the World Bank that it could be interesting to work with these kind of parametric approaches to reconstructing war-torn cities, such as in this case Fallujah in Iraq, which was a kind of test case for a research journal article that we just submitted, trying to demonstrate this approach of how it can be put to use within the framework of what the World Bank is doing in terms of facilitating urban reconstruction after I mean post-war situations. And just this next week, I'll be co-chairing, together with a colleague who's a virtual reality researcher, this small symposium under the auspices of the ECAD conferences in Aalborg on VR in architecture and design. So, which of course we're very happy to have and looking forward to host on Thursday and Friday next week, in case any of you happen to be in the area. be most welcome. So, and finishing off with one very small little vignette, which is kind of like some of these more Connemara spin-offs from sitting there all night coding. A small project I call the Fractal Casbah. I will just finish off this presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your very interesting presentations. Do you have 1, 2, 3 more questions? Okay, so maybe it looks like, okay, one more, yeah.
Hey, very nice presentation. I was wondering, because you're talking a lot about parametric design, why do you think you're using CityEngine and not like a software like Grasshopper, for example, or something else that's also kind of like
Well, we do use Grasshopper sometimes, not very much, but for instance, when it comes to generating road networks, as we can't really do that very well in CityEngine, so we kind of do some simple street center lines and then import them. Personally, I just find CityEngine to do the job. So I don't really fancy spreading my time and effort over too many different platforms. Actually, I hate pipelines and software frameworks. And as I said, I would really love to just stay inside of CityEngine for as long as possible. And I would really love CityEngine to acquire some of those rendering capabilities of Unreal and similar render platforms. Because, I mean, as I said, as soon as stuff freezes up, I feel constrained. Because, and particularly as my research is very much directed towards practice application, and this problem that there's always last minute changes. And if we need to wind back all the way down Unreal, Photoshop's, Illustrator, all this, I mean, we lose so much compared to being able to take it, I mean, almost to the end inside of one software platform. We cannot do that yet, but I mean, I'd really love to I mean, because it just saves so much time. And I mean, of course, if we need to do only little stuff and further down the line, we can do it. Or at least we can do it with little additional time. But if we fundamentally need to just, you know, take it, whatever we do through all these different links down the chain, then we waste a lot of time whenever we need to change stuff. And you always do, either because of user input or client input or last minute reviews from other other design professionals or engineers. There's always stuff that needs to be changed sometime. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much.